All right. Good morning again. How are you guys doing this morning? Really enjoying the talk so far? Woo! I got like one talk. Guys, I'm really excited to present for our next speaker here, who I've known for a few years, and another Fort Wayne person who's well known in the community. Chris Saylor has been in the IT field for about 25 years, concentrated in consulting services for the finance and healthcare industries before taking on the information security officer role at BSidesFW in 2018. Chris's unique ability to explain complex topics in a way that people understand. I've always appreciated that about Chris. He loved being able to take these topics and like, hey, why do I need this? And his people skills. Oh man, I just loved his people skills, the way he interacted with customers. Felt like I learned a lot from him, still learning a lot from him. So without further ado, please welcome Chris Saylor.
Well, after that really great introduction, prepare to be let down. It is, yeah. I will make one note if you see me take a few sips here and there. I fortunately just started a medication that gave me a really bad case of dry mouth, which is an awesome thing to happen when you're about to talk to a bunch of people up on a stage. But so this will do two things. One, it'll make sure that I can keep talking, and two, it'll make sure I don't talk too long. So like Ryan said, I've been in the IT/IS project management kind of role for 25 years now, just bopping around different industries. Pretty diverse background. Actually, in 2008, I was standing maybe on the same stage, I don't know, in the middle, performing a wedding ceremony in this room. So, done a lot of different things. But currently, I'm the information security officer at Pippin State Bank. TJ and I are bringing up the banking financial sector here today. The nice thing about that sector is governance is not an option. We don't really have a choice. We have to do it, or all the nice man from the government will come in and tell you you're not allowed to have your job anymore. And if the board doesn't replace you, then they'll replace the board. So it's not really an optional thing for us, which is great from a not getting a lot of argument on things we have to do standpoint, but also not fun because the audit and examination cycle is kind of never ending. It's just a constant thing we deal with. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about getting started with an information security governance program. You already have one, whether you know it or not. The question is how formal and defined it is. But if we're looking at what cybersecurity governance is, I like the CISA definition quite a bit. By the way, CISA has some amazing resources, especially if you're in a critical sector thing like banking, finance, energy, any kind of utility, or things that, just the world depends on to run these days. So cybersecurity governance is a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy that integrates with the organizational operations and prevents the interruption of activities due to cyber threats or attacks. That's a lot of things to say, but really that is what it boils down to. It's a way of managing an organization and the threats that face it. So I bet a lot of you are very familiar with technical controls. Everybody in here probably has an IPS/IDS at work. If not, you should. EDRs, access control lists, identity management, encryption. We're all really used to implementing these tools, or at least a lot of us are. And they're things that we have to, work with day in, day out for a lot of us. So technical controls are part of governance, but in reality, they're not the biggest part. Governance really is centered around people controls. It's not taking a system and configuring it properly and making sure it doesn't have any vulnerabilities in it. It's making sure that you've got a way for the people who are managing those systems to get that work done and accomplished, and just have some good guidance on how it should be done and the organizational support that they need to do it. So some people controls are things like a succession plan. If you are in a very critical spot in your organization, that's probably not a good thing. It's good to be somebody they can rely upon, but if a business relies upon you too much, you are a critical vulnerability that business has to remediate. If you're the only person who has all that information in your brain and you haven't written any of it down, don't be shocked if someday your boss goes, gee, I need to be pretty concerned about what you're doing and making sure that I've got some of that captured somewhere, or else if you get hit by a bus, we're done. So those kinds of people controls are really important. So configuration guidelines, remote access policies, social media use policies, information disposal policy, and on and on. There are a lot of different policies and procedures you can make, but they have to make sense for the organization. So you've probably heard governments require the consent of the governed. I'm here to tell you that cybersecurity governance absolutely requires the exact same thing. We have to work within the framework of our organization, and we have to speak the language of the organization. TJ hinted on some of that in his talk just a few minutes ago, if you were here for that. It's really critical that we, as technologists and people who are supposed to understand all the threats and risks to our environment, know how to communicate that to our business leadership. And just like he alluded to, and we didn't plan that, by the way, TJ's just awesome like that. You really have to understand the concept of risk. So risk is kind of hard to quantify sometimes. TJ had that neat diagram, how you can sort of assign categories to it. But at the end of the day, it's really just understanding your organization. So when we talk about risk, we look at impact and likelihood. So a meteor might fall out of the sky and destroy the facility, and we'll have to go to our DR site. Big impact, pretty low likelihood. A fire might break out in the data center. Likelihood's raising up there. Impact's still darn pretty high. Inherent risk is impact plus likelihood with the absence of controls. So I'm sure a lot of you in here know what controls are, but just by example, if I have a lot of virus and spam and things like that coming to my email, I'll put in an email gateway so that it captures those, filters it. That's a nice control to have there. So my inherent risk might be a lot lower than my normal amount of risk. Residual risk is the impact and likelihood with controls applied. And the risk appetite is something that's really critical to get your hands around. A lot of different organizations are willing to accept a lot of different levels of risks. I might look at something from the financial institute side of things and say, wow, I can't believe you're not doing that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. You need to implement this right away. Whereas they might have the perspective of, gee, yeah, that's a threat, but at the end of the day, if that goes down for a couple days, it's not really a big deal to me. And I'm gonna have to really think before I spend that amount of money on something that's not gonna cost me that amount of money. So figuring out what that risk appetite level is really important for your organization. It's also probably the most challenging thing that you can do. If you talk to your board, your board might say, we want the lowest risk appetite we can possibly have. I don't want you to do anything that could interrupt operations. Well, if you're quantifying that with them, patching interrupts operations quite a bit. There are all kinds of ways that can be worked around, and you have to really get in there and figure it out. So a big part of that is putting things in language that they can understand. So I might have this email I send over and I say, hey, CFO Bob, I need $250,000 in next year's budget for an XDR and some backup software. Thanks. Have any of you ever sent an email like that? Just here's an Excel spreadsheet, all the things I need to buy next year. Maybe that's okay in your organization, I don't know. My CFO, depending on how much it is, yeah, he doesn't care. But if I start getting into much higher dollars for us, his level of scrutiny gets a little bit higher, and I have to justify it. So that top email I might send over wouldn't go really well. But if I speak in the language of the business, which I guarantee your CFO does, hey CFO Bob, based on some issues I've seen impact other organizations in our industry, likelihood, I believe I've identified an unacceptable level of risk to the CRM system in use by the sales team. I worked with the sales director, and we've estimated that if we get hit with a similar issue, it will take us about 3 days to fix at a cost of around $1 million per day. Very realistic scenario. So again, we've hit our likelihood of it happening to a degree. We'll probably have to define that a little bit more with the CFO. But now we've got the impact quantified. So then next we have to address the controls that are there that we can use to compensate for the potential risk. I've identified some controls we can put in place to help prevent it from occurring and to help us reduce the amount of downtime to a few hours if it does occur. It's an upfront investment of $250,000 with an expected lifespan of 3 years. Please let me know when we can discuss whether this would be a good investment for us. If you've ever had a problem, I gotta watch that same risk there, TJ. If you've ever had a problem getting your projects approved, you have to ask yourself if you're speaking in the language they're gonna understand and that they can appreciate. My boss, he's awesome. Especially if anybody in this room knows him. I'm saying that, so you all back me up here. He's awesome. Chris said the nice thing. He's really great, but he kind of knows what XDR is. He's actually pretty savvy for a CFO in the IT world as far as CFOs go, but is it worth $250,000? I don't know, and he loves backups. My boss knows a lot about backups needing to be a thing and pays really close attention to them. He gets an email every day saying whether or not the backups are in good shape, and if they're not, what our plan is to get them fixed. And thankfully, lately, they've been kind of on wheels, so we'll see if that stays the case. By the way, that's the guy who sends the email. So it's really about speaking the language of the business and putting things in terms that they're going to understand. You have to tell them, how likely is this to happen? And if it does happen, what's it going to do to us? Your sales team might care a lot about the CRM. If your sales team isn't effective, well, you're probably not doing a very good job. Or you're probably going to get told you're not doing a good job, I should say. It's really important to protect those critical assets. So when we look at starting a governance program, we have to start understanding what it is that we need to protect. So we talk about technology inventories and, maybe I need to protect this switch over here that's got a really critical function. So I'm gonna make sure that it's linked up with another switch and it can have some automated failover. I'm gonna look at all different kinds of things and say, these are the things that I need to do. But really, until I understand their impact on the business if they don't work properly, it's pretty moot. So governance and all of its components exist solely to further the goals and objectives of the business. It's what you've got to remember. As technologists, sometimes we go, well, I need this. Okay, why? Well, because duh, you should have that. Why do you have IPS IDS on your firewall? Why do you need a SIM? SIM, however you want to pronounce it. I've never figured it out. You have to be able to put that in the context of how it's going to impact your business and what it'll do for you. If you can't do that, you're not going to get very far. And it's a really critical part if you want to transition from being an information technology worker, an information systems worker, into an information systems manager. It's the one skill set you've got to have. You've really got to have that communication capability. Somebody that really helped me figure a lot of this out is kind of surprising. But how many of you have heard of Gabe Newell? Yeah, some gamers in here. Gabe Newell was another chubby gentleman who really put something into perspective for me. He said this back in, oh gosh, it's been about 20 years now. But this has a big impact to us. Have you ever used a piece of digital media with digital rights management software built into it? It's a real pain, isn't it? If you ever watch a DVD or Blu-ray or whatever they are now, and you had to sit through all those FBI warnings about everything and unskippable previews for other movies, when you're trying to watch a disc that you own and you can't get past that stuff. It's really annoying, isn't it? And the problem that we came up with piracy in the internet is that, frankly, the pirated product was usually better. If I wanted to download some game, and I'm not advocating this, but I've been around for a while, and I was a teenager with access to Usenet. If you wanted to download some game, it was way easier than going to the store, getting the box set, installing it that way, looking up the special passcode in the manual back when games came with manuals to type into the into the screen to say that you're approved, or remembering some CD key, or 2 years from now you decide, gee, I want to play that again. And for the life of you, you can't find the manual that had the secret password that you need to install it. The pirated product, on the other hand, very easy to use. You just download it, you apply this patch you get off of CD keys or somewhere like that, and you could use it right away. So Gabe said, one thing that we have learned is that piracy is not a pricing issue, it's a service issue. The easiest way to stop piracy is not by putting anti-piracy technology to work, it's by giving those people a service that is better than what they are receiving from the pirates. We saw this with Netflix. People used to, download movies and things like that, and some people still do. That absolutely still happens, but it became a lot less of an issue when you could pay $10, or it's probably 20 now, and have access to this giant media content library that is so painless to use, it's easier than piracy. You just give them your credit card and bam, you have all of this content right away, as long as you've got a decent internet connection. Gabe figured the same thing out for software, specifically games, where he took a look at this and said, you know what, I've got this problem with non-compliance. People don't want to buy the thing. They don't want to do what they're supposed to do because it is just so much easier to use the pirated product without all those digital rights management things we have stripped into them. And he did that, and he turned himself into the founder and owner of a $7 billion corporation. So that one idea he took, and he saw this problem where it's so hard to do it the right way, or even if it's not that hard, it's still measurably better to do it the wrong way. And he built a whole company around that principle and really revolutionized the gaming industry. So when we take a look at our people in our environments, have you ever had this phone call? Hey, sales guy Jim here. I need admin rights on my laptop. Sorry, Jim, company policy doesn't allow that. Sales guy Jim loses his composure, goes off on you and says, oh, you're gonna hear about it. Well, 15 minutes later, CEO Mike to the IT guy. Sales guy Jim needs to do his job. I don't care what it takes, give him what he needs right now. And you do that, right? Because the CEO just told you to. And maybe if you're super brave, you're gonna be like, well, we don't do this because of this reason or anything like that. But seriously, raise your hand if you've ever had this scenario play out. All the time, right? And I'm gonna tell you what, sometimes users are jerks, and they just are, and there's nothing you can do about it. But this phone call is probably, if you're the information security manager, your fault. You failed to anticipate what sales guy Jim needs to do his job. Sales guy Jim probably doesn't need local admin, but something is getting in his way. Maybe he's got to restart a service that keeps going down. Maybe he's got to be able to install applications, things like that. You haven't gone through and interviewed sales guy Jim or his department manager and said, what do you do every day? How is it that you get business done for our company? How do you help make us money? Because most companies in general are there to make money. If you don't know how your company makes money, you can't do an effective job at managing an information security environment. You have to be able to look and take any position in your organization and figure out what they need to be able to do their job from a technology standpoint and how they make the company money. Because you can't govern the amount of risk that's acceptable for them if you don't know their impact to the organization. Salespeople are kind of obvious and they're notorious for reasons. Salespeople are very driven to get it done. They don't care how, they just want to get somebody to sign that piece of paper that gets them a check that gets deposited in their bank account a little bit later. That's their sole motivation. And you know what? That's the CEO's sole motivation too. He wants that salesperson out there selling like crazy, getting all the income he can for the organization. And if you as the information security manager or IT person are constantly throwing up stumbling blocks that stop Jim from getting his job done, I wouldn't be shocked if the CEO decides that you're the block that needs to get removed. It's really important for us to get a hold of this concept. So frustrated and aggressive users often have a reason for their frustration. It's a service issue. The easiest way to avoid them is to make sure the governance program identifies their needs in advance and implements controls that are compatible with their day-to-day activities. While ITIS exists to fix problems when needed, the bulk of our time should be devoted to preventing them. That's it right there. That's the information security officer's job, to prevent issues before they happen. That's the IT person's job, is to prevent that from being a problem before it stops the business from doing whatever activity they can come up with. That's an original quote from me. Unfortunately, unlike Gabe Newell, I don't have $7 billion. Working on it slow. Yeah, unfortunately though, or one thing that I do have in my favor, unlike Gabe, I can count to 3. So when you're looking at building an information security governance program, it's important to start small. One, make sure you have a defined inventory. Know what it is you're protecting and know why it matters. Like I said, you need to know what sales guy Jim needs to be able to do his job. And you need to know what the HR team needs to do their job. You need to know what all those different various departments that make up your organization require to be able to function in their daily life, so that when something doesn't function, you can help address it in a way that meets the organizational needs for security while still facilitating the work to get accomplished. So when we start looking at policies that we can implement and everything like that, this is a few steps down the road. You want to get your identification going first and that kind of thing. But just to give you some ideas, something like an acceptable use policy. You're using this company asset. Here's what it's okay for you to do with it. Don't conduct personal business on it. Make sure people around you can't see what's on your screen if they're not privileged to have the same level of content and access that you are. Remote access. Should everybody in the organization have remote access? Maybe. Me personally, absolutely not. In fact, the bulk majority of our environment does not have any kind of remote access whatsoever. Some have very limited access, and then just a few have full access to everything that they could need. So get that defined. And these have to come from the top down. You might be the person who instigates the conversation. You might be the person supplying the facts, but ultimately that CEO, that board needs to be the one making these decisions. And yeah, they might just be rubber stamping something that you approved, but when they endorse that, and they, even if they don't understand the deep technical nature of it, when they put their seal of approval on it, and you're going out there and trying to enforce these policies, you have the advantage of saying, this is what the board wants, this is what the CEO wants. So that when sales guy Jim makes that phone call, if it's something the CEO is already aware of and he goes, hey, sales guy Jim, I totally understand, we're gonna get you up and running here as fast as we can, but let me go talk to our information security manager and find the safest way to do this for you real quick. We'll get you going. The CEO understands why you're putting up that roadblock and why you don't want CEO Jim to have local admin access. So coming up with these policies are really important. Privileged access. Should they be stored somewhere? How should they be stored? What kind of authentication controls do we want to have? Change management. If you can get these 4 going, you probably have a pretty good start to a governance program. But again, the first part you have to do is go out there and find out how your business operates. If you want to, find some starter, the nice thing is you don't have to come up with this all on your own. There are a lot of frameworks that are already out there, pre-existing, where you can go out on the web, find a copy of the framework, and start working through the modules. So NIST is probably my favorite because I'm in a government-regulated institution. They're big fans of NIST. In fact, it was an executive order that a lot of our industry has to start adopting NIST and zero trust, the NIST zero trust approach anyway. You've got NIST, ISO 27001, CIS control, SOC 2, all these different kinds of things that you can use to help start building your program out. And there are different ones for different industries. NIST is probably the best catch-all up there, but if you're in manufacturing or healthcare or something like that, one of these might mean a lot more to you than it does to other people. If you're constantly taking credit card payments and dealing with transactions like that, you probably want to be PCI DSS compliant. So you're going to go through all their requirements in there. So it's really important to find a framework and start implementing the controls. And that does not mean you have to be 100% unless you're in some sort of regulatory organization where you have to be. But you can use those to get yourself started and start making those changes. And then when you educate your leadership about what those are and why they mean, or why they're important, you're going to get a lot of traction in your organization. This is the way to transition into management. If you haven't done it yet and it's something you're interested in, starting to speak a language, getting some strategic action items around your information security that are complementary to the business and can help save them money or even help make them money. Man, what kind of workforce multiplier is the PC sitting on somebody's desk? It's huge, right? So you're protecting that. You're protecting their ability to earn income for the organization. Once you've got a framework adopted, you're not done. In fact, you're never done. You need to identify your assets. You need to find a way to protect those assets that meets the acceptable risk level your organization is willing to take. You need to find a way to detect issues with those, detect changes you need to make in that. If you have an incident, how are you going to respond to it? And then how are you going to recover from it? You know, if you were here for Ira's talk last year, he showed this really great graphic that I probably should have put in my slides, where you've got an explosion. And off to the left of it, you've got everything you were doing before the explosion. And off to the right, you've got everything you did after the explosion. Maybe you didn't have good identity and access management for your Office 365 environment. And somebody got into one of your mailboxes and they just, soaked up a whole bunch of information. And now you've got to send all those lovely letters out to customers and pay for all the damages. Or maybe they even use that to send a really good internal phishing message from that internal employee. And guess what? Now you've got some nasty virus running through your systems, going out, encrypting everything, ransomwaring everything. So I mean, it's really important to have that kind of perspective on it. And if you think about all that stuff that's over to the right of the boom, why aren't you doing that now? So if you know that there's a high impact, reasonably likelihood thing that could be happening, if you want to be really valuable to your organization by preventing problems instead of resolving them when they happen, you're going to have to look at those right of boom things. What would you do? Because how many of you have ever been in a subject where something exploded and all of a sudden the budget is non-existent? Here's a blank check. Go get whatever you need to stop this from happening again right now. Happens all the time, every day. Probably just happened to somebody this morning. Start figuring out those things that you can do to detect those problems before they happen. And your response can be proactive. It doesn't have to be after the fact. But then when you recover, you're going to start all over again because the bad guys keep coming up with new ways to do things. Cisco keeps introducing new patches that break things. Yeah, I'm looking at you, John. It's just, we live in these constantly changing environments. So when you're looking to identify and detect and respond, it's really important to pay attention to your audits. And those are internal and external. But I'm going to tell you what, you can't universally rely on external auditors. I'm sure that quite a few of you were familiar with LastPass's recent incidents, right? Now they've had a slew of them over the years, but these last few really, they were just a whole other level of oops. LastPass, if you go out to their trust website where they tell you all the things they do, they're ISO 27001, they're SOC 2 Type 2. They've adopted all kinds of frameworks. They can tell you that their data centers are secured and that kind of thing. But I'd just be willing to bet that somebody somewhere along the line, some auditor came along or some internal person came along and said, gee, why is this engineer accessing such a critical resource like the entire password database backup library from a personal device that we don't control? And by the way, he happens to be running a Plex server on it with a 4-year-old version, and that's how all of these headlines started getting generated. They had some issues in June, but I gotta tell you, I don't know what the financial impact on this has been, but how many of you think it was small? It's just huge. And if you don't know, LastPass lost the entire password database and all the K1 keys and everything like that if you were federated. So good times, right? If you're still with them, run. But your goal is to stop these headlines from showing up about your own organization. Your goal is to stop these things that lose money for your company from happening in the first place. You're there to maintain the productivity of your environment. You're there to ensure that that environment moves as smoothly as you can from a technology standpoint. Yes, every other department has to do their job too. You know, it's all one machine that works together. But if you don't understand how your business makes money and how those individual components are going to help you build a program that makes sense for your organization and accomplishes the goals and objectives of the organization, if you can't build out an ITIS strategic plan, it's something you really need to start thinking about, because as your organization grows, it's going to become more and more critical. And yeah, some of this stuff is really easy when you have a 20, 30, 50 person company. You don't need all these formal processes and procedures. But as you grow and as you want to grow, you're going to need to start developing these things. And if you don't have them, you have to get them. So in summary, a properly constructed and executed governance program brings order to chaos and ensures that business technologies are in alignment with the business goals and objectives. You got to drive it into your brain that that is the most important thing you can do. You're there to facilitate, not to go put in the flashiest whiz-waz file transfer program you can get or anything like that. Maybe, you know, some really simple solution is the best one. Maybe you've got a plain text FTP server sitting out there wild on the internet, and boy, you should get some controls around that. But you do that by starting to get communication up to your organizational leadership, making them aware of the risk, making them aware of the controls that are possible to apply to mitigate that risk. And that could include everything from a patching program to buying insurance. Insurance is another great way to mitigate risk. There are some things, gosh, if you handed me $8 million right now per person in the organization, I still couldn't come up with a way to really mitigate that risk. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to get insurance for it. It's all about understanding your business and what kind of controls they need. And if you can be that person for your organization, it's going to do some really amazing things for your career. So thank you very much, and I appreciate it. I hope this was helpful. So I know I'm standing between you and lunch, but I don't think that starts for a few minutes. Any questions?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about zero trust? Can you, I guess, can you talk about what's working and what's not as you're looking at zero trust, and what are some of the opportunities there?
You know, if I had to pick out an obstacle for zero trust, it's vendors. They make software we have to operate. I have extremely little input and control on how that is. So, you know, they might have some crazy thing in there. They might want, you know, admin privileges for something, which by the way, they don't get. I do my best to make sure those are as contained as I can. But, you know, if we're talking about zero trust and identifying those crown jewels of information, you just have to find the controls that you can reasonably put in place that facilitate the business need and still do as best you can with the security need. But that's probably my biggest obstacle, is having to support those solutions that, while I have a hand in helping to pick out, I don't have a hand in designing, making sure you get a software bill of materials, things like that. It's really critical. And that's a huge part of governance that if you follow a NIST framework or something like that, they talk about exhaustively. Vendor management is probably the biggest area we have that's a hurdle in securing our environments. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a good afternoon.